The night I killed Alara Vale, it was raining. I remember that detail with a clarity that shames me. The way the rain carved lines down the tall arched windows of the throne room, the way the candlelight fractured through the water and threw trembling gold across the marble floor. I remember thinking it was almost beautiful. I remember thinking many things that night that had nothing to do with the woman kneeling in front of me. I remember not looking at her face. That was deliberate. That was survival, mine, not hers. Even then, some cowardly buried part of me knew that if I looked at her face I might hesitate, and hesitation was a luxury I had never once afforded myself. I had built 20 years of power on the architecture of decisiveness. You decide. You act. You do not look. So I did not look. I looked at the rain instead. She did not beg. That was the thing about Alara that I had always, quietly, privately, in the locked room at the back of my mind where I kept things I would never say aloud, respected. Even at the very end, kneeling on cold marble in a room full of people who had once called her friend and were now watching her fall with carefully arranged expressions of neutrality, she did not beg. She held her chin level. Her hands, bound at the wrist, rested still in her lap. She was composure made flesh, and I had spent 5 years systematically stripping everything from her, and she was still composed, and I hated her for it. I hated her because she made it hard. Alara Vale, I said, and my voice came out exactly as I had trained it, resonant, uninflected, the voice of a man announcing whether rather than a verdict. You are found guilty of conspiracy against the crown, of treasonous correspondence with the northern faction, and of deliberate subversion of the peace accord. None of those things were true. We both knew it. Half the room knew it. The other half had been paid not to know it. She raised her eyes to mine then, and I almost looked away. Almost. Brown eyes, darker than I remember from when we were young, from before I became this, from before she became the one thread that could unravel everything I had woven. There was no fear in them. There was something worse than fear. There was pity. She pitied me. Kneeling on the floor of her own execution, and she looked at me with pity, and something in my chest cracked along a hairline fracture that I sealed immediately, ruthlessly, the way you press your thumb over a wound and hold until the bleeding stops. You know, none of that is true, she said. Her voice was quiet, not accusing, almost gentle. You know exactly what you're doing, Evander. Lord Evander, someone corrected nervously from the gallery. She didn't even glance at them. She kept her eyes on mine. I hope, she said, and she said it slowly, like she was choosing each word the way you choose stones to build something that will last, that whatever you bought with my life, I hope it was worth it to you. I hope when you are old and the rooms are quiet and there is no one left who loves you, I hope you remember exactly what you traded me for. I signed the order. I did not look at her face. She died before dawn. Efficiently. Without ceremony. I had made sure of it. I was many things, but I was not a man who enjoyed prolonged suffering, which I had always told myself made me better than the others who wielded power like a cudgel just to feel it land. I was precise. I was surgical. I told myself this made me something other than monstrous. Lies are easier when you are the one constructing them. I spent the years after her death building the empire I had dismantled her to build. The northern territories came to heal. The southern trade routes opened. The crown owed me 3 favors I could call in at will, and courts from one end of the kingdom to the other said my name with a particular quality of silence that I had learned to read as power. I had everything. I had built everything. I was at the absolute apex of everything I had ever wanted. I was 53 years old when I died in a cold room alone. Not dramatically. Not at the hands of an enemy, which would have been not fitting exactly, but at least narratively coherent. I died of a fever that 3 different physicians failed to catch in time because none of them particularly wanted to be the one who delivered bad news to Evander, and so they each waited for someone else to say it first, and by the time someone said it, I was already burning from the inside out. There was no one in the room when I died. My staff stood outside the door. Not from grief, from uncertainty about protocol. Who notifies whom when a man like me stops existing? Who cries? Who decides who cries? Nobody came. In the last conscious minutes I had, burning on sweat-soaked sheets with rain, always rain, tapping at the windows, I thought about Alara Vale's eyes, the pity in them. And I understood too late too completely what she had actually been saying to me on that marble floor. She had not been cursing me. She had been warning me. I hope you remember exactly what you traded me for. I did. I lay there and I remembered, and the remembering was the worst thing I had ever experienced, worse than any physical pain, because I had traded her for an empire of rooms that echoed and a death that no one witnessed and a life that had the shape of victory and the texture of nothing at all. I thought I would give it all back. Every piece of it. I would give it all back. And then I died. And then I woke up. I was 22 years old. I knew this the way you know things in dreams, not from evidence but from the absolute cellular certainty of it. I lay in my bed, my old bed, the one in the east wing of the Dravenmore estate, with a carved oak headboard and the green velvet curtains that I had always meant to replace and never had, and I stared at the ceiling, and I conducted a very careful, very quiet inventory of myself. 22. The year was right. I could tell from the quality of light, the specific smell of the estate in early spring, the sound of the groundskeeper's cart on the gravel path below the window, a sound I had not heard in 30 years. My body was 22. No ache in the left shoulder that had troubled me since 40. No tightness behind the eyes that came with decades of reading documents by insufficient candlelight. 22 and intact and breathing and impossibly, inexplicably, insultingly alive. I lay very still for a long time. Then I sat up, pressed my hands flat against my thighs, and said aloud to the empty room, "All right, just that. All right." Because what else do you say? I knew exactly what day it was. I knew because this day, this specific morning, 22 years old, early spring with a groundskeeper's cart on the gravel, was the day it had all truly begun. Not in the grand dramatic sense that stories like to assign to things. It had begun quietly, the way most disasters do, with a letter. The letter. I was out of bed before I finished the thought. My study was exactly as I remembered it, younger, less scarred, the desk not yet bearing the ink stain from the winter I was 28, the shelves not yet holding the particular set of documents that would eventually constitute the architecture of ruin I built for others. Everything was clean and potential and unmarked. I crossed to the desk, opened the left drawer, the one I had always used for correspondence I considered sensitive, and there it was, still sealed, still unread by anyone but me. The falsified letter implicating Lord Vale, Alara's father, in a conspiracy that did not exist. I had written it myself in a copied hand, using information I had purchased and connections I had cultivated for exactly this purpose. Lord Vale was the last obstacle between me and the Northern Territories. He was a good man. I had known even then that he was a good man, which had made him an obstacle rather than an asset, because good men are inconvenient when you are building something that requires dirty foundations. I had sent this letter to 3 different parties simultaneously. Lord Vale had been arrested within the week. Alara, 20 years old and just beginning to understand the shape of the world she lived in, had stood in the court gallery and watched her father be taken, and I had stood across the room, and I had not looked at her face then either. The letter was the first domino. I picked it up. I held it for a moment, this small, neat, catastrophic thing. This piece of paper that had started a chain of events that ended with a woman kneeling on cold marble, with me signing my name to her death, with me dying alone in a room that echoed. I put it in the fireplace, and I held a candle to it, and I watched it burn. It caught slowly, then all at once, the way things do. The wax seal bubbled. The edges curled black. The careful forged handwriting, I had been proud of it once, the craftsmanship of the thing, dissolved into ash. I watched until there was nothing left. Then I sat down on the floor in front of the fireplace, which was something I had never done in my entire first life, and I pressed my back against the chair behind me, and I said to the ash, "That's one. There were many more." I spent the first 3 days of my second life making lists. Not the kind of lists I used to make. Those had been tactical, forward-looking, architectural. What do I need and who has it, and what is the most efficient path between those 2 points? These lists were different. These lists were a reckoning. Every person I had harmed. Every family I had dismantled. Every truth I had buried, and every lie I had planted, and every moment I had looked away, because looking would have cost me something. I wrote them all down in a small leather notebook I kept locked in the inner pocket of my coat, close to my chest, which felt appropriate in a way I didn't examine too carefully. The list was long. It was longer than I expected, which told me something about the particular talent I had possessed for not examining the consequences of my own actions. I had been very good at that. I could admit this now, alone, in my second life, exceptional at the practice of not following the logic of my choices all the way to their human ends. I stopped the logic at the strategic outcome. The territory secured. The alliance formed. The obstacle removed. I never continued it too, and then her daughter spent 3 years in poverty, and then his son could not find employment because of the name, and then she died not knowing why everything had been taken from her. I followed it now, all the way to the end. Every chain of consequence. I wrote it down. Then I started, methodically, and without fanfare, fixing it. Lord Vale first. That was obvious. He was the first domino, and if I could prevent his fall, perhaps the others would not need to fall at all. I could not simply unsend the letter. I had burned it, but the parties I had intended to send it to still existed, and the men I had paid to set the trap were still waiting for their signal. I sent different signals. I had money, my family's money, which at 22 I had not yet spent constructing power, and which therefore existed in full. I used it with a freedom I had never permitted myself in my first life, where every coin had been an investment towards something, where generosity had been a performance executed for strategic return. This was different. This was simply, here is money, stop what you are doing, the matter is resolved. 3 men received unexpected payments, and a very polite note informing them that their services were no longer required, and that it would be in everyone's best interest to consider this particular episode concluded. Men of that kind understood such notes. They concluded it. Lord Vale received an anonymous letter of his own, a true one this time, warning him that certain interest had been moving against him and advising specific precautions. I wrote it in a genuinely disguised hand and felt something strange while doing so. The same care, the same craftsmanship, the same attention to detail I had once applied to his destruction, now applied to his protection. The skills were the same. I had simply, at last, aimed them differently. 6 weeks into my second life, I attended the spring court gathering. I had not wanted to. The spring court gathering was where I had first truly begun the systematic isolation of Alara Vale, first turning her allies against her with well-placed rumors, then ensuring that the social ground she stood on developed enough hairline cracks that when the larger blows came, she would already be unstable. It had been elegant work, in the way that the word elegant can be stripped of anything good and used to describe only precision. I went because I needed to see her. Not in the way I would have once gone to assess a threat, clinically, strategically, filing away information the way you file documents, useful and bloodless. I went because I needed to see with my own eyes that she was whole. That the Alara Vale who existed at 20 years old, 6 weeks before her father would have been arrested in my first life, was still intact, still unhurt, still in possession of everything that was hers. I told myself that was the only reason. I was not entirely honest with myself, but I was working on it. I saw her the moment I walked into the hall. That was not remarkable. Alara Vale had always commanded a room without appearing to try, which had been one of the things that made her dangerous to me in the first life, and which I had therefore catalogued as a threat rather than examining what it actually was. She stood near the eastern windows with 2 women I recognized, Lady Corin and a younger cousin whose name I was reconstructing from memory, and she was laughing at something one of them had said, and the laugh was real, unperformed, the kind that reaches the eyes and stays there for a moment after the sound has stopped. She was 20 years old, and her father was still free, and she did not know yet what the world was capable of doing to her. Something in my chest did the cracking thing again. I had felt it more frequently in these 6 weeks than I had in the entirety of my first life, and I was beginning to suspect it was not a structural flaw, but simply the sensation of being a person rather than a mechanism. Unfamiliar. Not entirely unwelcome. I did not approach her. That would have been too much too soon, and I had learned in 30 additional years of living, even badly, the difference between urgent and wise. Instead, I took up a position near the refreshment table, which gave me sightlines to most of the room, and I did what I had always done in social gatherings. I watched. What I saw made me set down my glass very carefully. She was watching me too. Not openly. Alara had never done anything openly that she could do with more efficiency at an angle. She was watching me the way a chess player watches the board, not any single piece, but the whole geometry of it, where everything is in relation to everything else. And when our eyes met for a single moment across the width of the hall, I saw something in her face that I had not expected to see for months yet, if ever. Recognition. Not the social kind. Not a yes, Lord Evander, we have met at previous gatherings. The other kind. The deep, cold, cellular kind that goes all the way down. She knew. I kept my face perfectly still, which cost me something, and I looked away first, and I spent the rest of the evening recalibrating everything I thought I knew about what I was walking into. She was reborn too. I did not confirm this immediately. I was not the kind of man who leaped to conclusions when careful observation would do. But I spent the following weeks watching, and what I watched dismantled any alternative explanation. She moved differently than a 20-year-old woman with no particular enemies should move. She moved like someone who had memorized the exits. She spoke in social gatherings with a measured quality of a person translating in real time, not from another language, but from another version of events, checking what she said against what she knew, making sure nothing revealed too much. She watched me with the particular attention of someone who has already seen how the story ends and is working backward from the conclusion. She remembered everything, which meant she remembered what I had done, which meant she had come back knowing every weapon in my arsenal, every move in my playbook, every person I had ever used, and every method I had ever employed. She had come back armed with 30 years of hindsight and a fury I could feel from across a room like weather changing. She had come back for me. And here I was, having spent 6 weeks quietly dismantling every trap she expected me to set. I sat with this information for 3 days. Then I wrote it in my notebook under a new heading. Not a list of wrongs to fix this time, but a single sentence. She is here. She remembers. She will try to destroy me. I will not let her destroy herself in the attempt. The first trap came in the 3rd month. It was elegant. I could admit that even as the subject. She had taken one of my own methods and reversed it, the way you reverse a lock's mechanism to understand it, and then use the understanding to build something that will jam it permanently. In my first life, I had used a forged correspondence between Lord Vale and a northern faction leader to create the appearance of treason. She had obtained, somehow, through means I could only admire, a forged correspondence between me and a southern trade consortium, designed to make it appear I was moving money illegally through channels that would attract exactly the kind of crown scrutiny that would end a career like mine before it began. It would have worked. On the Evander of my first life, it would have worked perfectly, because the Evander of my first life had been moving money illegally through those exact channels for entirely different reasons, and the investigation it triggered would have uncovered the real crimes while prosecuting the false one, and the result would have been the same. I was not doing any of that anymore. The investigation came. I welcomed it. I opened every ledger, produced every record, invited every scrutinizing eye into every corner of my financial dealings, and what they found was nothing. Impeccable records. Legitimate transactions. A young lord whose finances were almost aggressively clean, as though he had nothing whatsoever to hide. Because I didn't. I heard about her reaction secondhand, through the particular social ecosystem of rumor that I had spent a first lifetime learning to read like a language. She had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not peace but recalibration. Good, I thought. Recalibrate. Look at what I actually am now, not what you remember. I also thought, she's going to try harder next time. I was right. The second attempt was more personal. Smarter. She went after my alliances, specifically the alliance I was in the process of building with Lord Cashin of the Eastern Territories, which in my first life had been a purely transactional relationship I had eventually exploited and discarded, and which in this life I was attempting to build into something genuine because Lord Cashin was, underneath his defensive exterior and his well-earned suspicion of people like me, a fundamentally decent man who deserved better than what I had given him. The first time around, Alara approached him directly. I could imagine the conversation. She was too intelligent to lie outright, too careful to expose her full hand. She would have offered him something that was technically true and structurally misleading, would have framed it in the language of friendly warning. Lord Evander's friendship has a cost. I've seen how he treats those he has finished using. She was not wrong. About the first life version of me, she was not wrong at all. Cashin came to me the following week, a little stiff, a little watchful, and asked me directly, which was so characteristic of him that I felt something warm and complicated in my chest, whether there was anything about my intentions toward our alliance that he should know. I told him the truth. Not all of it. The full truth involved reincarnation and a list of sins in a leather notebook, and that conversation would have required significantly more wine than either of us had on hand. But I told him the truth about what I wanted from the alliance, which was not what I had wanted in my first life. I wanted it to be real. I wanted to actually build something with him, something that benefited both our territories, something that did not have a hidden mechanism I could trigger later when he stopped being useful. I told him that someone had warned him against me, and that I understood why, and that I was not going to tell him the warning was wrong exactly, but that I was asking him to judge me by what I actually did rather than what I might have once been capable of. He studied me for a long time with those careful Eastern Lord eyes. Then he said, "That is either the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a decade or an extremely sophisticated manipulation." "I know," I said. "I understand why you can't tell the difference. I'm asking you to watch and decide." He watched. He stayed. It was perhaps the first alliance I had built in either lifetime that I did not feel I needed to hold together with strategic pressure and the implicit threat of what I could do if it fell apart. Ilara's second trap closed on empty air. I began to understand the pattern of what she was doing. She was working from memory, specifically from the memory of every move I had made in the first life, every weakness I had exploited, every method I had used. She was turning my own playbook against me, which was brilliant, and it would have been devastating, except that I had abandoned the playbook entirely. The difficulty, and I thought about this in the quiet hours, the ones that used to be filled with strategy and were now filled with something uncomfortably close to reflection, was that she had no way of knowing this. From where she stood, I was either genuinely changed or I was running a longer, more sophisticated game than anything she had seen from me before. And the second option was she would have to admit consistent with my capabilities. She had known me as a man who thought 10 moves ahead. A man who changed completely and appeared to have no ulterior motive could absolutely be a man thinking 15 moves ahead. I could not blame her for the suspicion. I had earned it completely and specifically. But it created a problem I had not fully anticipated. How do you prove you have changed to someone who knows exactly what you are capable of pretending? I did not have an answer. I kept working anyway. The third attempt was the one that cost her something, and watching it cost her something cost me something in turn. She had identified a woman named Lady Soren, a widow of middling station who had been, in my first life, one of the instruments I used to deliver social ruin to people I wanted isolated. I had cultivated Lady Soren's trust, fed her information, and let her carry it into social circles I wanted it to reach, and she had never known she was being used. She was a gossip and a lonely woman, and I had aimed her like an arrow and never thought about her again. Ilara intended to do the same thing. She had spent weeks building a friendship with Lady Soren. I could see it, the careful cultivation, the strategic warmth, and then I suspected she planned to feed her something about me that would travel through those same circles and arrive at a destination Ilara had chosen in advance. I went to Lady Soren first. Not with exposure, that would have been cruel, and I was trying very hard to stop being cruel. I went to her with something I should have given her in the first life, and had not, genuine friendship. Or the beginning of it, which was all I could honestly offer, because I was new at this, and I was aware that genuine friendship is not something you can produce on a timeline for strategic purposes without it becoming something else entirely. I visited her. I listened to her. She was sharp and funny and desperately underestimated by every room she entered, which I understood better than I had any right to admit. I told her carefully, and without naming names, that I had reason to believe someone might be approaching her in the near future with information about me that was designed to be passed along, and that I would be grateful if she came to me directly should that happen. She looked at me with eyes that had seen a great deal of the world's less flattering aspects. "Why would you tell me this rather than simply avoiding me?" "Because," I said, "avoiding you would be the easier thing, and I am attempting to stop doing the easier thing when the right thing is available." She was quiet for a moment. "You are a very strange young man, Lord Evander." "I am aware," I said. When Ilara approached her, and she did 2 weeks later, Lady Soren listened politely, asked clarifying questions, and then came to me the following afternoon and told me everything. Not out of loyalty to me, exactly out of a preference for being treated as a full person rather than a delivery mechanism. I thanked her sincerely. I also had flowers sent to her the following week, which had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the fact that she had mentioned, in passing, that no one had sent her flowers since her husband died. The third trap closed on empty air. Why I had not accounted for what I had somehow, with all my 30 additional years of accumulated understanding, failed to fully model, was what this would do to her. Ilara Vale had come back with a purpose. That purpose was singular, burning, total. She had organized a second life around project of my destruction, and every day that I refused to be destroyable was a day she spent in a state of mounting, bewildering frustration. I could see it. I was always watching, could not seem to stop watching, in the slight tightening around her eyes at court, in the way her composure had a quality of maintenance to it now, of effort, that it had not had in the early weeks. She was working very hard at being in control of herself, which meant she was not in control of herself. The worst part, the part that I lay awake thinking about in the small hours of my second life, was that her situation was genuinely terrible, and I was the cause of it even now, even trying to fix things. In my first life, I had destroyed her world by attacking it directly. In this life, I was dismantling her purpose simply by refusing to be the enemy she needed me to be, and the effect was not so different. She had built herself around opposition to me, and I kept pulling the ground out from under it. I had not thought about this carefully enough at the start. I had thought, fix things, correct the wrongs, stop being what you were. I had not thought, and what does this do to the person who organized her entire second chance around your wrongness? I thought about it now. I began to see things I had missed from a distance. She was not eating enough. This I observed at 3 separate dinners, where she moved food around her plate with a mechanical performance of someone who had received a note from their body that could be addressed later. She was sleeping poorly. This I deduced from the quality of her attention at morning court gatherings, which was sharp but thin, the sharpness of someone running on determination rather than rest. She had stopped laughing the real way, the one that reached the eyes and stayed. The laugh she used in public now was a performance, and a good one, but I had seen the real thing and I knew the difference. She was hollowing herself out, running a second life on the fuel of a vendetta that kept finding nothing to burn, and the nothing was eating her alive. This was my fault. All of it was my fault. Even the new damage, which I was causing by trying to undo the old damage. There was something so perfectly, horribly fitting about that I almost wanted to laugh, except that it was not remotely funny. The one person he most needed to save was the one most determined to destroy herself, trying to destroy him. I had known this in some abstract sense from the beginning. Knowing it abstractly and watching it happen in front of you are entirely different things. The fourth trap was the one that told me how desperate she was becoming. She came after me directly. Not through proxies, not through financial investigation, not through careful social maneuvering. She arranged to be alone with me, maneuvered it, actually with a skill I could only appreciate, finding the one event in the spring social calendar where it was plausible for both of us to be present and implausible for us to avoid each other, and then simply appearing in a side garden off the main hall when I happened to be walking through it. I stopped. She stopped. We looked at each other across 8 feet of gravel path and neatly maintained hedgerow, and this was the first time in my second life that we had been genuinely alone together, genuinely close enough to speak, and the reality of her, not the observed at distance reality, not the analytical subject of my watching, but the actual person, alive and standing in afternoon light with her jaw set and her eyes doing that thing they did where they looked at you as though they could see 3 layers. Underneath the surface was something I had not entirely prepared for. Evander, she said. No title. His name only, which was either informality or intimacy or a very specific kind of hostility, and I was not immediately sure which. Lady Alara, I said. Something moved across her face. You're not going to pretend you don't know why I'm here. No, I agreed. I'm not. She studied me. What are you doing? The question was so direct, so stripped of the elaborate architecture of indirection she had been using for months, that I felt it land somewhere specific. What do you mean? You know what I mean. Her voice was controlled. The control was costing her. The letter. Cashin. Lady Soren. Every time I have moved you have, she stopped. Pressed her lips together. Started again. You are not doing what you should be doing. What should I be doing? You know what you should be doing. Her eyes were very dark and very direct, and I thought, not for the first time, that the truest thing I had ever understood about Alara Vale was that her composure was not coldness. It had never been coldness. It was heat, tightly controlled, the kind that burns cleaner and longer than open flame. You should be doing what you always do. Taking, manipulating, destroying. You should be doing all of it. Instead she made a small frustrated gesture that cracked my chest clean open. You burned the letter. I went still. How do you know about the letter? Because I knew you were going to send it, she said flatly. I had people watching. They watched you burn it. She searched my face. Why? I looked at her, really looked at her, the way I had refused to look at her in the throne room, the way I had been refusing to look at people my entire first life because looking was costly, and I had always been tallying costs. I looked at her completely, without flinching, without looking away. Because it was wrong, I said. It was wrong, and it would have destroyed your father, and eventually it would have destroyed you. And I am not going to do it. The silence stretched between us like something physical. Why, she said, and her voice had changed, dropped lower, had something in it I could not name except that it frightened me slightly. Should I believe that? You shouldn't, I said. Not yet. You have no evidence for it except my behavior, and you know better than anyone that I am capable of constructing behavior as performance. I am not going to tell you to trust me. I'm going to tell you that I know exactly what I was, and I know what I did to you, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left in this life making it right, and you don't have to believe me. You just have to watch. Her jaw was tight. Her hands at her sides were not entirely still. You destroyed everything I had. Yes, I said. I know. My father. My name. She stopped. Something crossed her face that was too raw to be called by any polite name. You took everything. Yes. And you think you can simply correct it? Rewrite it. Put it all back. Not all of it, I said, and I said it quietly because it was the truest thing I knew. Some things can't be put back. You can't unbuild what I built in that life. You can't. I can't give you back the years or the grief or what it cost you. I know that. I'm not trying to erase it. I am trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. That is all I am trying to do. She looked at me for a long time. The afternoon light shifted. Somewhere in the garden, a bird made a sound and then stopped. I don't believe you, she said finally. I know, I said. Watch anyway. She left. I stood in the garden alone and realized my hands were not entirely still either. The weeks after the garden conversation were the strangest of my second life. She did not stop watching me. If anything, she watched more closely, more precisely, with a concentration of someone who has been told to watch and cannot decide if they are watching for confirmation or for refutation and is disturbed to find they no longer know which they want. I felt her attention like a specific quality of air pressure, which was not unpleasant, which was information I put in the locked room and didn't examine. I kept working. Lord Vale's situation had been stabilized. The threats I had quietly dismantled left him secure in his position, his alliances intact, his name untarnished. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he seemed in good spirits, which was such a small thing and cost me such a disproportionate amount of emotion that I had to take a moment alone to address it. I had expected fixing things to feel like strategy, like the first life's work, only aimed correctly. I had not expected it to feel like this, like something in the chest loosening, like breathing getting incrementally easier, like the rooms I walked through were acquiring dimension they had not previously had. I had not expected to feel things. This was a significant design flaw in my plan for my second life, which had involved a great deal of decisive corrective action and very little accommodation for the reality that corrective action, when it actually works, produces feelings, and feelings are not something I had any meaningful practice in managing. I managed them badly. I wrote in the notebook. I walked the estate grounds at hours that were not entirely rational. I had 3 conversations with Lord Cashin that started as practical alliance business and became something I could only describe as friendship, which was alarming and also not unwelcome. Unfamiliar things were becoming not unwelcome. I noted this as a data point and continued. The 5th attempt came and was the most sophisticated of all, and for the first time, I did not see it coming until it had almost landed. She had been watching me long enough to update her model. She knew the investigation hadn't found anything, because there was nothing to find. She knew Cashin had stayed because I had been honest with him. She knew Lady Soren had come to me because I had treated her as a person. She had processed all of this, and the conclusion she had reached, I pieced it together afterward, running the logic backward, was that if I had genuinely changed, there would be something I was protecting now that I had not been protecting before. Something real that could be threatened. She found Lord Cashin. Not to warn him against me this time. To threaten what we were building, the trade agreement, 3 months of careful negotiation, something that would genuinely benefit both our territories and that I had put actual work into rather than strategic performance. She moved against it from the supply chain and found a factor in the eastern grain routes that could be pressured, and pressured him, and the agreement began to show cracks. I found out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I understood what was happening. By Friday, I had a choice. Fight for the agreement using the methods I would have used in my first life, which were available to me. I still knew them. They were still in my head like a language you never unlearn, or do something else. I did something else. I went to Cashin, and I told him the truth. More of it this time. Not the reincarnation. I was still not ready to have that conversation with anyone, including myself fully, but the shape of it. I told him that someone was working against the agreement specifically to test whether I would revert to old methods to protect it, and that I was choosing not to, and that if the agreement fell because of this, then it fell, and I was sorry, and I would rather lose the agreement honestly than keep it through the methods I was capable of using. Cashin looked at me for a very long time. You are aware, he said carefully, that what you just did is essentially hand me the ability to destroy everything we've built by simply walking away. Yes, I said. And you did it anyway. Yes. Why? I thought about it. Because in another life, I said, choosing the words carefully, I was someone who treated people as instruments. I used them and I did not tell them the truth, and I held the important things back because giving someone the ability to hurt you is the most dangerous thing you can do when you have built your whole existence on being the one who cannot be hurt. I paused. I am trying to be someone different. Someone different tells you the truth, even when it gives you leverage. Someone different trusts you not to use it. Cashin was quiet for a while. Outside his window, the eastern city went about its business, unhurried and indifferent. The agreement stands, he said. I'll address the supply chain issue myself. I thanked him. He waved it off in the way he had. The particular dismissive gesture that I had come to understand meant he was more moved than he wanted to show. I was learning to read the people around me in a different way than I had before. Not for weakness, not for leverage, but just for who they actually were. It was slower. It was infinitely more complicated. It was the most interesting thing I had ever done. The fifth trap closed on empty air. But this time the empty air had cost me something, and I found I did not mind. I think the moment she began to believe me was a Wednesday in late autumn. Not because of anything dramatic. Nothing in the shift of a real human being happens the way it does in the story versions of things, all at once in a moment of orchestrated revelation. It happened quietly, the way the actual important things happen. She had been at the same gathering as me, a weekly court luncheon that we had both been attending for months, orbiting each other with a careful distance of two people who have had a garden conversation that changed the geometry of something and are still calculating the new angles. I had been talking to a young court official named Darren, who was 24 and in over his head in a political situation that was going to end his career unless someone helped him navigate it, and who reminded me of myself at that age except without the cruelty, which made him both more sympathetic and more vulnerable. I spent 40 minutes with him. I told him things I had learned over 30 years that he had no way of knowing yet. I did it without any expectation of return, without filing it under alliances to be called in later, without thinking about it strategically at all. I did it because he was 24 and floundering, and I knew exactly what it felt like to be in a room where everyone else seemed to know the rules you hadn't been given, and because of my first life I had seen young men like him and considered them either useful or irrelevant, and I was finished with that accounting system. I became aware, at some point during this conversation, that she was watching me. Not from across the room this time. From 8 feet away, close enough that when I glanced up and caught her looking, there was no time for either of us to arrange our faces into something more managed. Her face, in that unguarded half-second, held something I did not have a word for, and spent a long time afterward trying to find one. It was not belief, exactly. Not forgiveness, that was a different country, further off, the road to which I had only just found the beginning of. It was something more like the moment before belief. The moment where the evidence has accumulated past the point you can dismiss it, and you haven't yet decided what to do about that. She looked at me like someone looking at a map and realizing the territory might not be what the map said. I looked back at her. I did not look away. The moment ended. She moved on. I returned to Darren and his political situation, and I did not think about her expression for the rest of the afternoon. I thought about it every night for 2 weeks. She came to find me again in early winter. Not a manufactured encounter this time. No arranged coincidences. No side gardens engineered for private conversation. She came to my estate, sent a formal card ahead as was proper, and arrived at the hour she had specified, which told me everything about what this was. She had thought about it, decided to do it, and done it cleanly without giving herself time to reconsider. I had her shown to the library. I stood up when she came in. She stopped just inside the door. I have been trying, she said, without preamble, without the social scaffolding that existed precisely for moments where you needed time to figure out what you were actually going to say, to find the mechanism. The mechanism, I repeated. The mechanism behind what you're doing. She met my eyes. Every time I have moved against you, there was nothing there. Every time I looked for the version of you that I remember, it wasn't where I expected it. Every time I tried to find the manipulation underneath what looked like a genuine action, I found she stopped. Her jaw worked slightly. Nothing. The action was just the action. Yes, I said. I don't understand it. I know. Help me understand it. I looked at her for a long moment. The fire in the library was the only sound in the room, a low, even crackling, the sound of something giving off warmth slowly and steadily without burning itself out. I had been sitting by it reading when she arrived. There was a second chair, which I had not placed there strategically, but which had always been there, which had sat empty for every evening I had spent in this library in the months since I woke up in my own past. Sit down, I said. Please. She sat. I sat. The fire crackled. I remember dying, I said. I had not said this aloud to anyone. The words had a particular texture coming out, rough-edged, unfamiliar from disuse. I remember the exact room and the exact quality of the light and the exact chain of thoughts. I remember what I regretted. I looked at my hands, then looked at her. I regretted everything. Not in the general sense of a man trying to make a death more meaningful than it was. Every specific thing. Every specific person. I knew at the end exactly what I had traded them for, and exactly whether it had been worth it. She was very still. It wasn't, I said. None of it. Not a single piece. I paused. I regretted you most. The words landed in the room and stayed there. I know that doesn't. I'm not saying it to ask for something. I continued carefully. I'm not saying it so you'll forgive me. I'm saying it because you asked me to help you understand, and that is the truth of it. I died knowing exactly what I had done to you and exactly that it was unforgivable. And then I woke up in my own past with a specific and completely undeserved opportunity to do it differently. And I am doing it differently. That's all. That's the whole mechanism. There isn't anything underneath it. She was quiet for a very long time. Long enough that the fire shifted and resettled, and outside the library windows the winter dark deepened, and a clock somewhere in the house marked the hour. I came back to destroy you, she said at last. Her voice was different, quieter, the control in it different, not the tight heat-controlled composure, but something more like honesty, which sounded different on everyone, always once you learned to hear it. I came back and I was so sure. I had all of it, everything you'd done, every method, every move. I had a plan. I had a purpose. A pause. I had a reason to be here. I understood what she was saying underneath what she was saying. The reason to be here. The second life organized entirely around a single purpose, and the purpose kept finding nothing to attach itself to. And without the purpose, the question of what she was actually doing here opened up enormous and unanswered. You have a reason to be here, I said. Do what? Flat. Direct. A real question. Your father is well. Your name is untouched. The things I took from you in the first life, most of them are still yours. They were never taken. I met her eyes. That is a reason. Not the one you came back with. But a reason. She looked at me. You did that. Yes. You kept them from me. Yes. Something moved through her face. A complicated thing, many-layered, the kind of expression that is the external trace of an internal process too complex to name from the outside. I don't know what to do with that, she said. You don't have to do anything with it, I said. You don't owe me anything for it. I didn't do it for exchange. I know, she said. And then quietly, as if she was surprising herself, that's the part one don't know what to do with. I have been thinking about what she said. That's the part one don't know what to do with. I understand it. I understand it better than she knows because I spent my first life doing everything for exchange, tallying every kindness and every cruelty in the same ledger with the same cold-eyed assessment of return, and I understand what it is to encounter something that doesn't fit that accounting system and to not have a category for it. I am learning. Slowly, badly, with significant gaps in my practice. But learning. What I know is this: I'm not the man I was. The man I was is a thing I carry with me in a leather notebook, a list of names, a weight I have decided not to put down because I think setting it down will be a different kind of mistake. Not the carrying of it, which is appropriate, but the forgetting of it, which would not be. I carry it. I work from it. I make, where I can, what small repairs the second life allows. The repairs are incomplete. They will always be incomplete. You cannot undo 30 years of architecture in 30 months. You cannot restore what was taken. Some of it is gone, in the form of the lives that went differently, because I made them go differently. the griefs that happened because I engineered them, the years that cost people things I had no right to cost them. I know this. I do not look away from it. But Lord Vale as well. His name is good. He does not know who protected him or why, and he does not need to know. The protection was not a favor to be returned. It was a debt being paid in the only currency available. Cash in as well. We are building something real together, something that will outlast both of us, something I would have called naive in my first life and now understand was the only kind of worth building. Lady Soren had a garden party last month. She sent me an invitation and I attended, and she introduced me to her friends as a young lord who is considerably less terrible than I expected, which I am choosing to receive as a compliment. And Alara. Alara Vale is not my ally. She is not my friend, not yet, not exactly. Those are words that belong to a future that hasn't decided to happen yet. That depends on 1,000 small moments and choices and the slow accumulation of evidence that even she, with her full memories and her justified fury and her brilliant, unforgiving intelligence, cannot continue to dismiss indefinitely. But she came back to my library 2 weeks after our conversation. She sent the card ahead properly and arrived at the hour she specified, and I had her shown in, and we sat by the fire for 3 hours and talked about things that were not traps. She asked me questions about what I remembered. I asked her questions about what she remembered. We compared notes, like two survivors of a shipwreck, carefully reconstructing what the ship had looked like, what its failure points had been, whether it might have been built differently. At the end of the 3 hours, she stood up to leave, and I walked her to the door, and she paused in the doorway with the winter cold at her back and said, without looking at me, "I'm not ready to forgive you." "I know," I said. "I might not ever be." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to keep watching you." "Good," I said. She looked at me then. Those dark eyes, 20 years old and holding 30 years of memory, looking at me with something that had moved, incrementally, painfully, at the pace of a person doing something very difficult, past the category of enemy into something that did not yet have a name. "Why did you say good?" "Because," I said, "I intend to keep being worth watching." She left. I stood in the doorway and watched her go, and the winter cold came in, and I let it. I came back to save her. I think what I did not understand at the start, burning a letter in a fireplace at 22 years old alone, telling the ash that's one, without saving her was never going to be a single act. It was not the letter. It was not dismantling the traps. It was not even protecting her father, though I would do that again and again with no hesitation. Saving her is this, every day, in every choice, being someone different than the man she came back knowing. Being someone who makes her question whether the story she returned to finish is the one that's actually happening. Being someone who makes room in her second life for a possibility that wasn't there in her first. That she doesn't have to spend it destroying me. That she could, if she chose, in her own time, in her own way, without being asked or pushed or maneuvered toward it, spend it building something instead. I don't know if she will. I have no leverage over it. That is the whole point. No leverage, no strategy, nothing underneath. Just the daily work of being different, and the patience to let the evidence accumulate, and the understanding that some debts take a lifetime to pay down, and that is appropriate and right. I have a lifetime. I intend to use it correctly this time. The notebook is still in my pocket. The list is still there. I add to it less often now, which I think means something. I still don't look away.